Hi, and welcome to today's episode of The Food Chain with me, Emmanuel Bright Kweku. A few days ago, the Savannah Agricultural Research Institute of the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research released Ghana's first genetically modified product, a cowpea variety for commercialization. Known as the Borer Resistant Cowpea, this particular crop is said to resist the effect of a pest known as the Maruca vitra. While the adoption of genetically modified products in Ghana's agricultural space has been a contentious subject, particularly on the safety of these products. Before we delve into today's discussion here on the food chain, my colleague Martina Bugri was at the northern region where this particular product was unveiled and has filed this report.
The Savannah Agricultural Research Institute of the CSIR for the last 12 years has worked to commercialize a resistant cowpea variety to address the devastation the pod bearer insect caused to yields of farmers. The pod bearer insect is said to be one of the pests that continues to destroy yields of farmers in the 5 regions of the north, forcing most farmers to spray several times before harvest. This, according to experts, not only increase the cost of production but also harmful to humans because of the high chemical spraying. Cowpea production in Ghana has been low over the years with an average of under 10 maxi bags per hectare, despite the crop's potential to produce up to 25 maxi bags. But with the introduction of the Songotra tea, it is expected to address the challenge. Speaking in an interview after the launch, Director General CSIR Paul Bonsu said the Songotra cowpea will reduce the spraying to just 2.
It's out to make the cultivation of cowpea better.
The Executive Director of the African Agricultural Technology Foundation, Dr. Kaniswa Kanajiri, said the cowpea is safe for humans as well as animal consumption.
For adoption of agricultural technology in general, agricultural biotech in the hands of the farmers, and it will change agriculture for quite long time because the farmer will be prosperous.
A representative from the Ministry of Agriculture, Al-Hassan Abdul Fattah, called on farmers to take advantage of the new variety.
What I want to urge farmers to do is that now cowpea is a cash crop, and it's also good for our nutritional status because it's a low protein food. So I will urge all farmers to try it and see, so that they will know that anytime SARI, in collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture, whatever variety they bring is to improve the living condition and increase the yield of farmers to better their lives.
And so that's what transpired in the northern region during this particular unveiling for the GM products. But really, does the country need GMOs? I've been interacting with the principal investigator of this cowpea project, Dr. Jerry Imbonyin, and also Yusuf Suleimana, who is the Director of Research for the Center for Climate Change and Food Security. He is actually not in support of introducing GMOs in our agricultural space now. My name is Emmanuel Bright Kweku. Stay with us. Doc, so I'd want to understand, what was the original problem with the cowpeas we had in the country that's called for this genetic modification?
So typically, when you plant cowpea, the moment cowpea comes out of the soil, if there is absence of rain, you have an insect known as aphid that will suck all the sap in the plant. Then before you realize, the cowpea will start wrinkling. Apart from aphid, we have other insects known as white flies and leafhoppers. Then when the plant gets to the vegetative stage, we have thrips and the legume pod borer or maruca coming on the crop. Then when you have the pods also coming on, you have a group of insects that we call the pod sucking bugs also coming on to destroy the pods that are being formed. And apart from the pod sucking bugs, you also have the maruca again coming on it. So what happened was that we did a comprehensive assessment. So this problem is not just limited to Ghana. Let me state it. Anywhere cowpea is grown, these problems are real. So for a very, very long time, what scientists decided to do was to try to see how can the Maruca problem in cowpea be solved. Maruca was critical because it destroys the crop at the flowering stage. It also destroys the crop at the podding stage. And once it is inside the flower or inside the pod, no matter the number of times a farmer sprays, it is ineffective at actually controlling that particular insect pest. And because of that, farmers will usually, right from the time of planting to the time of harvest, they will spray at least 6 times. Some go to 8 times, some go to 10 times, depending on how clean they want their cowpea to be. Now you can imagine the effect of spraying insecticides up to 8 times on a crop that is normally on the field for just 2 weeks. What that basically means is that almost every single week, the farmer is hanging a knapsack trying to spray the crop. Imagine the effect of the insecticide on the health of the farmer. Even the cost of spraying the chemical is another factor. So to tackle that particular problem, we had to start by going through what is known as the germplasm for cowpea. So you search among wild relatives of cowpea to find out if any of them is able to overcome damage by this particular insect. So after screening over 15,000 different wild cowpea materials, we could not identify any of them as being able to possess any appreciable level of resistance to this particular insect. What that meant is that after screening them, all of them could be damaged by this particular insect. Now, the next option was that what was the options available? Thanks to modern biotechnology, where you can use genetic engineering to develop varieties that are resistant to a particular crop. And all what we have done is that if you look at farmers who grow their crops organically, there is an insecticide that they spray in organic farming known as the BT insecticide. So we basically used the gene from that BT to actually insert it into the cowpea so that the cowpea is able to protect itself from damage by this particular insect.
But this scientific discovery has met fierce opposition from some farmer groups, including the Peasant Farmers Association and other members of the scientific community. Concerns over the safety of the cowpea on both the environment and human have come up as the product is reported to produce a protein known as Cry1AB that resists the effect of the bean pod borer. I know you said you inserted this particular gene, the BT gene, and we understand that it produces a Cry1AB toxin. I want to know, is there any established data on it in terms of toxicity to the soil itself and even for human consumption? When you did the studies, what did you find?
So, like I mentioned earlier, the National Biosafety Authority will not give you approval if it is toxic to humans and if it is toxic to any organism in the environment. Now, let me state that the Cry1AB gene is specific to a group of insects known as Lepidoptera. That is, insects that have their young developing stages being caterpillars. When I say caterpillar, I think the common word that comes to mind is what we call gogomi. So if you have any insect that is a caterpillar, they are the ones that this particular protein is able to actually control. Apart from that, it cannot control any other protein, any other insect. Now, when we conducted the studies, we allowed the plant to be able to produce the protein at particular levels that were toxic to just that particular insect. Beyond that, we also conducted what is called the pepsin digestibility studies. Now, pepsin digestibility studies is just to find out, assuming this particular protein gets into, let's say, the body of a human being, what happens? There is sufficient data to show that apart from the fact that cry proteins are not toxic to humans, even within the human system, when it is exposed to the gastrointestinal fluids, within 5 seconds, everything gets degraded. So we conducted all these kinds of studies. We also conducted studies based on the per capita consumption of cowpea. So we know the quantity of cowpea that is consumed in Ghana based on statistics that are available. Then you even try to double that, assuming that even a human being is exposed to the cry protein the whole year up to certain levels. We realize that even if the protein accumulates and it is not degraded by intestinal fluids, still it doesn't pose any health hazard. And when I say any, I mean it does not pose even 1% health hazard. It has no hazard to human beings in any form, and it has no allergens in any form to any human being that consumes it. And let me also state that the cry proteins are one of the most widely studied proteins in the world. So as we are talking about cry proteins in 2024, the use of cry proteins started as far back as 1996 when the first commercial GM crop was released. So this is one of the most widely studied protein as far as GM crops are concerned. And a lot of information, a lot of publication is known on it. And I can tell you on authority that there is no single study that says that cry proteins, apart from killing Lepidoptera, are harmful to any other insect. So whether the pod-sucking bugs that I spoke of, which are insects, whether earthworms, whatever, cry proteins are not harmful to them, not to talk of human beings or animals that consume cowpea. They are not toxic to any of these categories of plants. And let me also state that the cry proteins are actually expressed in the flower of the cowpea and then in the pod, because the insect attacks the flower and then it attacks the pod. So when you actually try to even analyze the grain for the presence of that particular protein, you hardly find traces of that particular protein in the grain, because the target is the pod that the insect will try to take a bite at before it moves into the pod, and then the flower where the insect will try to destroy. So those are the basic facts about it. A lot of literature available on cry proteins, and none of them ever says that cry proteins are harmful. It is the same cry proteins that are used in maize to control fall armyworm and other insects in maize. They are effective mostly against the Lepidoptera and not any other group of insects, not to talk of human beings.
So we also want to establish, I know we've done for the human and then the animal aspects. When this toxin is actually produced, does it have any effect on the soil? Because we must be concerned as well, ecological effects. Is there anything like that? Do we have any established data on it? Or what did you find when you conducted yours?
So I remember stating earlier that we had to check the effect, the non-target effect. So not just on soil organisms, but even on pollinators and on natural enemies such as predators. And the results were very, very categorical and clear that cry proteins are not toxic to whether predators such as ladybird beetles or parasitoids or earthworms or any of those organisms that are present. Even when you choose to, assuming a farmer decides to plow the residues of the cowpea into the soil, it has no harmful effect on any other organism. The only thing it does is to control the legume pod borer, that is the maruca. Apart from that insect, it has no harmful effect on any other organism.
Director of Research at the Center for Climate Change and Food Security in Ghana, Suleimana Yusuf, disagrees.
I've assessed their data. There is no data on the effects of the cowpea on soil microbiome. There's no data. Why are they lying? If I may put it, excuse my language. I've assessed the data they put to the NBA. If they have data on the effect of the crops on soil microbiome, they should make it available to me and to the Center for Climate Change and Food Security, and let us assess it to see if indeed what they're saying is the truth. Right? Because one of the reasons why GMs are being pushed away from some of these advanced countries, for example, as I mentioned in Europe, is because of the fear, and some of it have been verified scientifically, the fear that these organisms have the potential to dilute other organisms, and in the course of time, you are likely to lose your native species, which are adapted to the vagaries of the climate, climatic conditions where you live. And the reasons why today the world is facing all these food crises coming out of crop failures caused by pathogens, pest attacks, diseases, and all of that is because we decided to intrude into nature through the Green Revolution and change the genome of native species that were, or crops that were initially very resistant and tolerant of the vagaries of the agroclimatic conditions, right? And when that happened and the world started, we started being treated with what we call the improved seedlings and improved seeds and all of that. That is when all these problems of pests and diseases and all of that began to occur in our crop production system. So nobody should try to deceive the public or to gaslight the issue here. There is no data, and I repeat, there is no data on the effect of the BT cowpea on the soil microbiome. That data, if it is available, was not presented to the NBA. And this is one of the many questions that we raise, because if this has the potential to shape the microbiome of the soil, then that soil is likely to become sterile to other crops that succeed the GM cowpea when it is grown. Because every crop has microorganisms that are associated with it within the root zone. We call that root zone the rhizosphere. And these microorganisms, usually they are in symbiosis with the crops, meaning that they help the crops, for example, for nutrient mobilization and all of that. And usually when you have a crop growing on a soil or growing in a field where the microorganisms in the soil or in the field are not in association, are not in symbiosis, that's the right word, are not in symbiosis with the crop, that crop cannot do well. This GM has the highest concentration of the Cry1AB toxin. If you compare this GM crop to other transgenic plants, and I have to issue a caveat here, I'm not saying the presence of the Cry1AB toxin is toxic to humans, right? But then, if you read the protocols for GM applications and granting of GM licenses, as put out or as adopted at the Cartagena conference in Spain, it mentions that you have to report on the presence of toxins. So, Cry1A toxin, now we don't have evidence that it's harmful to humans. But then the sheer fact that, or the fact that it is the highest, it has the current GM crop has the highest concentration of this toxin. It's a sort of worry to some of us, because we don't know, for example, when the crop begins to grow and then there are seasons of growth, we don't know if there's going to be upregulation or increase in the concentration of this particular toxin, right? So the point is that there are agroecological consequences that we don't know, or some of it are known from other GM examples. And even to the point of GM crops being toxic to animals, we've seen there are many studies on guinea pigs and other farm animals that have proven this from some crops like GM maize, soybeans, and all of that. These are facts. I've seen that in their data, for example, they provide data on the trials with pollinators. But I want to state that the number of pollinators they use for their trials pales into insignificance when you juxtapose that against the number of pollinators that we have. That said, yes, we know it is not compulsory, but ask them if they have control over pollen transfer. So if I have a plantation just few meters away from yours, and yours is GM plantation, can I, for example, prevent the transfer of pollen into my area? I know also they provided data on this. I've studied that also. But then the point is that it is probable than not that the GM cowpea is likely to dilute other cowpeas, and the offspring, the progeny from such a dilution are likely to be GMs. These are facts. There are many studies that have shown that it could lead to, for example, invasive species, or how it's taken over by invasive species. Invasive species are organisms that are not native. Nobody knows where they come from. They come, and then it's very difficult to control them. So, for example, pest resistance is one of the things that have been identified as potential consequence of GM. Weed resistance, because, for example, if this gene transfers into another plant, which is a weed, it will be difficult to control that weed. That is why GM crops are very tolerant when it comes to chemicals.
Another concern has been the potential monopoly GM crops poses to the agric sector.
There are dozens of evidence that usually when a GM crop is grown, in the second cycle of growth, the crop doesn't do well, right? The crop doesn't do well, and this is a fact. So this is not the first time people are raising this issue. So the attempt to brush aside this important issue that the crops are not going to be readily available, and that even if they were available, the second growing seasons, the next growing seasons are not going to have the same harvest as the initial growing season. Farmers are likely to lose their livelihood. There is evidence in South Africa. So the CSIR guys cannot brush aside this important point.
You see, the use of GM, let me use the case of the cowpea, there's nothing like seed monopoly. CSIR has consistently provided enough quantities of seed for farmers to use. Let me state that the first phase of the planting for food and jobs relied on seeds that were developed at the CSIR to actually get to the level of success that that particular program attained. Seed monopoly, it's not an issue in this particular instance. Let me give you an example. Let me use the case of hybrid maize. So hybrid maize came into the system, and most of the hybrid maize that came were actually imported. The presence of those hybrid maize has not resulted in maize production or maize seed system being monopolized by anybody. It is a choice. If you are a farmer and you decide that you want to use your farmer safe seed, that is what you want to do. If you are a farmer and you think that I want to increase my yield, I want to produce grains that are healthy, and because of that, I am going in for GM cowpea, it is your choice. If you're a farmer and you say that, well, I am okay spraying 8 times within a 2 months period, it is your choice. You choose it. No one is going to monopolize any seed system. If there was going to be a monopoly, then even in the current agriculture system that we operate, that monopoly would have been there. But no one has monopolized any seed system in any form, and no one will be monopolizing any seed system going forward, whether GM or non-GM, because in this particular instance, the variety was developed as CSIR. The variety is going to be given to farmers from CSIR.
Okay, all right. So thank you very much. So we want to also find out that I know this fights for GM not coming into the country has been something that has been there. Lots of various views on it. But you think now as a country we need GMOs in our farming or agricultural space?
You see, as to whether we need GMOs or we don't need GMOs, GMOs is just one of the options that we have. Now, the first question that you ask is that, are we food secure as a country? Now, you check the latest inflation figures, and you will realize that food inflation is one of the highest. Are we self-sufficient in the production of most of our foods? One point I will want to make is that the GM technology is a very, very expensive technology. And because of that, no one goes into that technology if it is not absolutely necessary. So in the case of the cowpea, we went into that technology because we could not identify any natural source of resistance for the insect of interest. That is why we went into it. So as a country, whether we need GMOs, it depends on the crop and it depends on the problem that you are facing. If, for instance, you talk of a problem like aphid, and there are natural sources of resistance to aphid, why will you go for the GM technology? But then if you have a problem such as fall armyworm, such as the legume pod borer that I spoke of, and insects that requires the use of GM technology, then obviously you have to exploit it. Now, as a country, if we actually want to be food secure, the importance of biotechnology and biotechnological applications cannot be excluded from our agricultural system. Let me state here that biotechnology has been in the world for a long time. The insulin that are injected into the bloodstream of diabetics is actually a GM. And there are many other drug formulations that are actually genetically modified that we take. So if GM is being exploited in the health sector to treat human-related diseases, then this is not something we cannot say that we want to go hungry because ideologically someone feels that we should not go in for it. The main question that I will ask is, are GM foods safe? And the answer is that any commercially approved GM crop variety is 100% safe. In fact, let me state that the European Union commissioned a study into the safety of GM crops. They commissioned over 500 independent studies, and all those 500 independent studies came to the same conclusion that there is no difference between GM and non-GM crops.
Describing the move as a hasty adoption, Joseph believes the country's agricultural problems will not be solved by the GMOs.
The paradox of a shortage or hunger in the face of abundance, or in the presence of much, is not a problem that's caused by anything other than policy failure. So you have some countries that are producing 60%. Indeed, I want to ask the CSIR, how much food is going waste around the world? Because the problem in the world today is not production. Everybody knows this. The world is producing far more than we need, and much of it is going waste because of lack of post-harvest facilities, and also lack of consciousness on the part of consumers and all of that. So that is not a problem. Ghana should solve the problem of post-harvest loss, good road networks, credit facilities to farmers. If we are able, and then our soil, we need to pay attention to our soil. Our soil is so acidic, and that's why our harvest rate is also going down. For example, we need to, and I listened to the Vice President, the flag bearer of the MPP, mentioned liming soils, and people did not understand. This is a very important intervention that Ghana needs, because our soil is quite fragile, and because of the acidity in our soil, for example, plants are not able to have access to important nutrients, and even including, for example, micronutrients and all of that. And most of it gets leached away because there is so much what we call mineralization in the soil because of the heat and this is humic acid and all of that. These things inhibit plants' ability to take up nutrients and all of that. So these problems are what we need to solve, not GM cowpeas and all of that. And I'm sure you, in the next 10 years, we'll be here to discuss this, and I can assure you that the so-called solution that we are being told the GM cowpea is going to provide will not be there for us to see.
Meanwhile, other GM products like rice and potatoes are being experimented. Dr. Paul Bosu is the Director General of the CSIR.
We have the gene bank there, so it's not something, the fear, the concern is very much appreciated for the public to appreciate and to raise issues. But there's understanding, there's solution, and so I want to alert the fear of the fears of the public and everyone that that's how science progresses. No regulator would approve for you to put a product on the market, whether it's GMO or conventional. Of course, if you are a farmer, you go and pick it and you are using it at home. No, if you don't label, but for any certified seed producer, any seller worth its salt, putting it on the market, it has to be labeled.
While this debate continues, the Ghanaian farmer is anxious for a better farming practice or technology that can boost productivity, ensure the country's food security, while he also rakes in some profit from his source of livelihood. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion here on the food chain. Join me same time next week for another exciting episode. My name is Emmanuel Bright Quick.